How I broke their empire without saying a word. My name is Jennifer. I worked at a company so big they thought they owned the world. They didn't notice the girl in the corner. The girl who was very good with numbers. I saw a single digit out of place. A decimal point that didn't belong, it was so small. A whisper in a screaming room, I followed it. And it led me into a labyrinth of lies. I never raised my voice, I never made a threat. But I learned a secret. To break something powerful, you don't need a hammer. You just need the right kind of pressure, applied in exactly the right, silent place. And the patience to wait for the whole thing to crumble. My name is Jennifer, and this is the story of a whisper. Not a scream, not a shout, but a single, quiet whisper that grew into a truth that could not be ignored. This is how I, a woman you would never look at twice, brought down a castle of lies. It wasn't with fire or force, but with patience, with numbers, and with a silence that spoke louder than any confession. For nearly 6 years, I was a ghost at Titan Corp. If you worked there, maybe you saw me in the elevator, looking at the floor. Maybe you passed my cubicle in the accounting annex on the 17th floor. I was the one with the small, struggling fern and the framed photo of my mother. I wore the same kind of blouses, in soft blues and grays. I spoke when spoken to, I did my work, and I disappeared into the background like the hum of the fluorescent lights. That was my job, that was my armor. I needed that job more than I needed air. My real life, my important life, was in a small apartment across town. It was a place that always held two smells. The sharp, clean scent of rubbing alcohol and the gentle, sweet smell of my mother's lavender candles. Sarah, my mother, was sick. Her heart, the doctor said, was like a tired old pump, struggling to push life through her. Every month was a tightrope walk between my Titan Corp salary and the mountain of bills, the hospital, the specialists, the pills that looked like tiny, expensive jewels. My job wasn't a career to me. It was a life raft. I was grateful for its boredom, for its predictability. I was grateful to be invisible. But my mind wasn't invisible. My mind loved numbers. In a world where my mother's health was a daily question mark, where fear was my constant companion, numbers were my sanctuary. Numbers were honest. 2 plus 2 always made 4. A ledger had to balance. There was a beautiful, simple truth in a column of figures that added up perfectly. It was a kind of order I craved. My boss, Martin, ran our department of 20 bookkeepers like a nervous librarian. He hated drama, hated trouble. We were the plumbers of the financial world, unseen but necessary, fixing small leaks before anyone upstairs noticed the drip. No one famous ever thanked the plumber. Then there was the world above. The 42nd floor. That was where the air was different, colder, cleaner, scented with ambition and expensive cologne. That was where the gods lived. And their king was Richard Calloway. Richard Calloway was the head of the Blackwood Strategic Investment Fund. He wasn't just a boss, he was a star. His face was on magazine covers next to words like visionary and disruptor. He gave talks about changing the world through technology. He had silver hair that looked windblown even indoors, a smile that seemed personally crafted by a team of consultants, and a voice that could make a list of numbers sound like a promise from God. He moved through the building like a shark through calm water, sleek, powerful, and you just knew something was getting eaten. My first glimpse behind the perfect curtain was so small, so stupid, it should have meant nothing. It was a Thursday. Rain streaked the windows of the annex, making the city outside look like a wet painting. I was processing expense reports for the Blackwood executive team. This was mindless work. Scan the receipt, code it, file it away. Flight to Tokyo, hotel in Paris, dinner in San Francisco. The dinner receipt was from a place called Le Ciel Bleu. Total, $4,200. My cursor hovered over the scan. Something was wrong. It wasn't the amount. I'd seen Blackwood executives drop $10,000 on a bottle of wine without blinking. It was the receipt itself. As a digital file, it had a feel. The font for the total was ever so slightly different from the font listing the food. The spacing between the letters was a micron too wide. And in the metadata, the hidden DNA of a digital file, the merchant code was wrong. It should have been a code for a high-end credit card processor used by fancy restaurants. This code was for a bulk payment service, the kind used by online stores selling socks in packs of 10. This receipt wasn't scanned. It was built. Someone had created it on a computer. A cold drip of curiosity landed in my stomach. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is a typo, a wrong date. This was a choice, a deliberate, careful fabrication. Who makes a perfect fake receipt for a dinner? Someone practicing, someone testing the locks on the door. I didn't go to Martin. His kind, anxious face would have just crumpled in confusion. I didn't say a word to my coworker, Linda, who was humming beside me. I just saved a copy of the receipt. On my lunch break, instead of eating, I started to dig. Using my employee access, I pulled up the corporate card statement. The $4,200 charge was there, but when I traced the payment authorization, I saw a split. $3,800 was sent to the actual restaurant, Le Ciel Bleu. The remaining $400 was routed elsewhere. It went from Titan Corp's bank to a payment gateway called Transact Fast, then bounced to another called Global Pay Solutions, and finally vanished into an account with a number that wasn't in any Titan Corp vendor file. The account was a black hole, $400. In the ocean of money that was Blackwood, it was nothing, a rounding error, a penny lost in a sofa, but it was a hole, a tiny, deliberate puncture in the fabric of reality. It meant the system wasn't just leaking, someone was drilling holes in the hull. That night, I sat in the worn armchair by my mother's bed. The only light came from the street lamp outside, painting soft orange stripes across her blanket. Her breathing was a slow, raspy rhythm in the quiet room. I held her thin hand, tracing the blue veins under her papery skin. I looked at her face, so peaceful in sleep, and I thought of that $400, of the skill it took to steal it, the effort. It didn't feel like a crime against a giant corporation. It felt like a theft from her, from me, from the hours I spent watching numbers dance on a screen so she could have another day, another pill, another moment of peace. A quiet decision hardened inside me. I would look, just look. I needed to know if this was a single hole or if the hull was riddled with them. I created a hidden, encrypted folder on my work laptop. I called it The Garden. It felt right. I was just going to look at the flowers, but I had a feeling I'd find weeds, deep, tangled, poisonous weeds. I saved the fake receipt there, and then I began to garden. This is when my double life began. By day, I was Jennifer the reliable, the invisible. I mastered the art of being forgettable. I dressed in soft colors. I spoke in a low, even voice. I volunteered for the most tedious Blackwood audit work, the kind that made other people's eyes glaze over. I don't mind, I'd say with a small smile. I like the detail. I became part of the scenery, as expected as the gray carpet. By night, after I'd made my mother dinner, helped her to bed, and washed the dishes, I became a hunter. I would open my laptop, log into the secure Titan Corp server from home, a privilege granted due to my dedication, and I would hunt for weeds. I learned to see the sickness. It had a pattern, a rhythm. It was beautiful in its own horrible way. Here is how Richard Calloway's beautiful machine really worked. Step 1, find a shiny new startup, something exciting. Say a company called Nexus Air that claimed it could make drones powered by sunlight. It was run by young, bright-eyed people full of dreams. Step 2, have the Blackwood Fund invest heavily. Titan Corp pours in $8 million. Press release goes out. The startup founders are heroes. Their pictures are in tech blogs. Calloway stands beside them, beaming, the generous patron. Step 3, the bleeding begins. Within weeks, Nexus Air starts getting huge bills. A market feasibility study from a firm called Apex Horizon LLC for $250,000. A proprietary software integration suite from Vanguard Foundry Partners for $400,000. The bills are official-looking, with logos and terms of service. The startup, trusting their powerful benefactor Titan Corp, pays them without a second thought. Why wouldn't they? They have $8 million in the bank. Step 4, the money vanishes. Apex Horizon and Vanguard Foundry are ghosts. Their offices are empty mail drops. Their websites are single pages, built in an afternoon. The money wired to them is immediately forwarded through a chain of other shell companies to bank accounts in places like the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore. Places where questions get lost. Step 5, the startup fails. Bled dry of real operating cash, Nexus Air can't pay its real engineers, its real rent. It collapses 18 months later. The news reports call it a pivot that didn't work or ahead of its time. Titan Corp writes off the $8 million loss. Callaway gives a thoughtful interview about the courage to fail being essential to innovation. Step 6. Callaway's secret treasure chest grows. Millions of dollars, stolen from Titan Corp's investors and parked offshore, now belong to him. He used Titan Corp's money, Titan Corp's reputation, and the dreams of young founders to make himself a secret king. He wasn't just greedy, he was an architect. He built a castle in the shadows, brick by stolen brick. The scale of it, when I finally pieced it together over weeks of late nights, made me physically ill. I ran to my bathroom and dry-heaved over the toilet. It wasn't just the money. It was the cruelty of it, the calculated betrayal of everyone who trusted him. The moment my quiet hunt turned into a burning need for revenge was a cold Monday in October. An email arrived from the executive committee. The subject line, "Enhancing our competitive future, updates to your benefits." My heart sank before I even opened it. Enhancing never meant anything good. I read the dry, legal sentences. Our health insurance plan was being restructured to align with market leaders and ensure long-term sustainability. My eyes scanned down to the charts. The deductible, the amount I had to pay before insurance even started, was doubling. The copay for a specialist visit tripled, and on a new, terrifying list called Specialty Tier Formulary, I found the names of my mother's 3 most critical heart medications. Coverage 50%. 50%? I sat at my desk, the printout shaking in my hands. I looked out the window at the Titan Corp Tower, a sleek knife of steel and glass cutting into the sky. I had just read a profile of Callaway in a business magazine. He was on the deck of his new yacht, the calculated risk, laughing. The article mentioned the yacht had a bathroom with gold-plated fixtures. The sink alone cost more than I made in a year. I knew, right then, with a certainty that was ice cold and clear, where the money for that gold-plated sink had come from. It had come from this restructuring. It had come from my mother's life. From the fear in my stomach every time I opened a medical bill. A fire lit inside me. Not a wild, out-of-control blaze, but a forge fire. Hot, focused, and hard. This wasn't a puzzle anymore. This was a war. And Richard Callaway, in his Tower of Lies, had no idea he had just made an enemy. But how do you fight a god? You don't challenge him to a duel. You don't shout accusations from the street. He owned the board of directors. He played golf with senators. The company's lawyers existed to protect Titan Corp, and Titan Corp was Callaway's golden goose. If I went to them, I'd be the problem. A disgruntled employee, a liar. They would sue me for defamation, for breach of contract. They would bury me in legal fees until I was destitute. My mother would lose everything. So I had to fight a different way. My revenge would not be an explosion. It would be a slow, silent poison. 1,000 tiny cracks in his foundation. I would become a saboteur, a termite in the magnificent wooden beams of his empire. I would make the lies so heavy, so complicated, that they would collapse under their own weight. My first weapon was the financial model. Titan Corp used sophisticated software to evaluate startups. It crunched numbers on market size, competition, team experience, and spat out a score. A Callaway score, they called it. I had access to the master templates. I began to make adjustments. Not big, obvious changes. Tiny, justifiable nudges. If a startup's business plan projected capturing 15% of a market, I'd adjust the model's assumption to 13.5%. Citing a recent, slightly pessimistic industry report. I'd increased the execution risk variable by a few points, noting the young CEO had never managed a team through a recession. Each change was small, defensible. Each was a single grain of sand. But if you put enough grains of sand in a gearbox, eventually the gears grind to a halt. My second weapon was time. I discovered a beautiful, fragile flaw in the automated payment system. For security, there was a 12-hour validation window between when a manager like Everett approved an invoice for payment and when the money was actually wired out. I wrote a small, elegant script. It didn't steal a penny. It just, sometimes, triggered a delay within that window. A payment to Apex Horizon for a consulting fee, due to go out on Monday morning, would get mysteriously stuck. It would finally be sent on Tuesday afternoon. This caused beautiful chaos. The people Callaway hired to run these shell companies were criminals. They weren't patient. They wanted their money. When it was late, they got nervous. They called Callaway's office. They sent angry, sloppy emails. "Where is the wire? We had a deal." Nervous criminals make mistakes. They used the wrong email addresses. They referred to projects by their real names, not their code names. They were threads, and I was gently pulling them, hoping the whole sweater would unravel. My third weapon was the poison footnote. When the Blackwood analysts asked me for due diligence research on a potential investment, I was the picture of thoroughness. I'd compile a massive PDF, financials, news articles, patent filings, competitor analysis. And buried deep within it, on page 38 of a 45-page document, I'd include an appendix. Maybe it was a 2-year-old news story about a fraud case in the same industry. Maybe it was a dry report from the Treasury Department about red flags for money laundering. I never highlighted it. I never said, "Look here." I just planted the seed of doubt in a field of praise and waited for it to grow. Living this double life was like walking a tightrope over a canyon every single day. The paranoia became a second skin. The sound of a phone ringing would make me jump. The sight of Callaway's name in an email subject line would send a jolt of electricity down my spine. I stopped eating in the cafeteria. I stopped making small talk. I became a silhouette, a shadow moving through the office. My only comfort was my cat, Binks. At night, she would curl into the hollow of my stomach and purr, a steady, living vibration against the cold knot of fear I carried inside me. I could see the strain starting to show on Callaway's perfect empire. The first major crack appeared with a company called Vendetta. It was a darling of the green tech world, promising to make drinking water from sunlight and air. Blackwood had invested $30 million. My subtle model adjustments had made its Callaway score lukewarm. My payment delays to its fake vendors had caused a nasty internal fight. Then, a popular tech blogger wrote a deep dive piece questioning the core science behind Veridia's main device. That blogger had, months earlier, been sent an anonymous tip with a link to a critical research paper. A paper I had included as Appendix C in Veridia's original due diligence packet. Veridia collapsed. The $30 million loss was a public black eye for Blackwood. Callaway stormed into an all-hands meeting, his face flushed with a performative anger. He blamed ignorant bloggers, short-sighted investors, and the cowardice of those who can't imagine a better future. He was magnificent in his fury, but on the high-definition screen I saw it, a tiny flicker in his eyes just for a half-second. It wasn't anger, it was raw, primal fear. The machine he had built was making a strange noise. Then, a miracle. A crack of light in my dark, silent war. A young journalist named Leo Chen wrote for a scrappy, independent blog called The Chen Report. He was known for digging into tech failures. He published a story titled The Bermuda Triangle of Startups. He noticed that 3 of Titan Corp's high-profile flops, including Veridia, had all used the same obscure law firm in Delaware and the same niche, expensive patent reviewing agency. He was sniffing at the outer wall of the labyrinth. He emailed Titan Corp's press office with a list of sharp, intelligent questions. By a stroke of fate, that email was also automatically copied to a generic investor relations inquiry system. And that week, I was the junior staffer assigned to monitor that mailbox. I saw his name. I read his questions. My heart didn't just pound. It felt like a wild bird trying to escape its cage. This was it. The bridge from my silent, shadowy war to the world of light. To truth. That night, I told my mother's night nurse I had a late project. I took 3 different subway trains, getting off in a neighborhood where no one knew me. I found a public library, one of the old ones with dusty shelves and the smell of old paper. In a corner, on a computer that was older than I was, I created a new, encrypted email account. I called it Sisyphus62. In the Greek myth, Sisyphus was punished by the gods to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down each time. It felt right. My fight felt endless, hopeless. But I was still pushing. I opened the garden on a secure thumb drive. I selected one piece of evidence, not the biggest, but the cleanest. The complete story of the $4,200 fake dinner receipt. I created a document showing the original fake scan, the payments split in the corporate system, the path of the $400 through the payment gateways, and the final destination account in the Cayman Islands, which I had finally managed to trace to a shell company called Marquis Holdings, registered to a lawyer who represented several of Callaway's personal interests. I stripped the document of all metadata, the hidden information that could identify my computer, my location. I made it a ghost document. I attached it to an email from Sisyphus62 to Leo Chen. The subject line was, "The first drop." The body of the email was 3 lines, "Follow the pipe. The water is poisoned, more if you are safe." I hit send. The whoosh sound the old computer made seemed deafening in the silent library. I had just thrown a stone into a still pond. I had no idea how big the ripples would be. I walked home in the freezing dark, feeling more alone than I ever had. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I watched the news. I refreshed Leo Chen's blog every 10 minutes. 3 days later, he published a new piece. It wasn't about Titan Corp, it was a masterclass in forensic finance titled The Art of the Fake Receipt, a case study in digital deception. He used my document, anonymized and perfected with his own research. He laid out the entire scheme of the split payment, the shell company, the Cayman Islands account. He didn't name Callaway. He didn't name Titan Corp, he just asked, over and over, who has the skill to do this? Who has the access? And for $400, what are they practicing for? The financial world has very sensitive ears. The story was picked up by bigger blogs, then by smaller news sites. The word fraud was now in the air around Titan Corp, a buzzing, persistent insect. Callaway's response was swift and polished. He went on a major financial news network. He was charming, slightly amused. He called the story a digital age fairy tale, and the price of being a leader, people make up stories. He waved it away with a beautiful, manicured hand. But inside Titan Corp, the climate shifted. The board of directors, a group of older men and women who cared most about the stock price, got nervous. They demanded an independent internal review of Blackwood's governance procedures. It was a classic corporate move. Create a committee to investigate yourself. Callaway knew what this meant. He went on the offensive, but inside the company, walls went up. Access to Blackwood files was restricted, and he started cutting people loose. Not his inner circle, not Everett, but the periphery, the assistants who might have seen a strange email, the junior analysts who asked too many questions. 2 people from my own accounting department were let go with generous severance packages and strict non-disclosure agreements. They were paid to disappear and stay quiet. The office was filled with a cold, silent fear. You didn't talk about Blackwood. You didn't ask questions. You kept your head down and hoped you weren't next. I knew my time was running out. The independent review was a joke. It was being run by the prestigious law firm of Goodwin and Strauss, the same firm that had done Callaway's personal tax planning for a decade. They weren't hunters, they were cleaners. They would whitewash everything. I needed to force a real earthquake. I needed to make the system turn on itself. I needed to give the investigators a crime scene so obvious, so damning, that even friendly cleaners would have to call the police. My final move took me a month of planning. It was the most dangerous thing I had ever done. I had to hand them a treasure map to the crown jewels, but I couldn't be the one drawing it. I had to make it look like someone in Callaway's own castle had drawn it in a moment of panic. I found my canvas in the digital graveyard of Titan Corp's past. Years ago, they had acquired a small software company called DataStream. They wanted its patents, then they killed the company. But its old servers were still running in a forgotten corner of the network, a ghost ship adrift in the digital sea. No one ever logged in. No security updates had been installed in 5 years. It was perfect. Over weeks, in the dead of night from my home computer, I built a vault inside that ghost server. I called the folder Archive BAK, Backup Archive. It looked like junk. Inside, I placed the crown jewels of Callaway's crime. I selected 3 complete investment scams. The drone company Nexus Air, a failed virtual reality startup called Dreamweave, and a biofuel plant project that had never produced a single gallon. For each, I included everything. The original glowing Titan Corp investment memo, approved by Callaway. The fake invoices from Apex Horizon and Vanguard Foundry. The internal email chains where Callaway's team discussed managing the optics and keeping the founders calm. The bank wire transfer orders, showing the money flowing out to the shell companies. And the final, tragic email from the CEO of Nexusair to Callaway, pleading for more time, saying, "I don't understand where all the money went. We followed your advice on all the vendors. It was a prosecutor's dream." Then I dressed the crime scene. I hacked into the user logs of the server, a simple task given its age. I made it look like the vault had been accessed and modified from the computer terminal of Callaway's right-hand man, Everett Sloan. I used old passwords Everett was known to recycle. I left a trail of digital breadcrumbs, failed login attempts, file modification timestamps, all pointing to him. The final touch was a piece of theater. In a deleted items folder within the vault, I created a text file. It was a draft of an email never sent. It was from Everett to Callaway. It read, "Richard, the lawyers from G&S are asking specific questions about the Peak Ventures transfers for the Dreamweave project. They have transaction IDs. I don't think we can explain this one. The paper trail is too hot. We need to talk about a containment strategy. Maybe we can blame it on," and then it cut off. As if he'd been interrupted, panicked, and deleted it. It was perfect. It showed guilt, panic, and a direct link to Callaway. From my Sisyphus62 email account, I sent one final message. I sent it to two people, Leo Chen, and separately to the lead partner at Goodwin and Strauss running the independent review, a man named Arthur Finch. The message contained no files, no explanations. Just 2 lines: "You forgot to clean the basement. Server, dsarchive eminus 7/directory, /secure/archive BAK/KWI fund B." Then, I closed the laptop. I had just lit the fuse on a bomb and thrown it into the heart of the castle. There was nothing to do but wait. The next 48 hours were a special kind of torture. Every time my work phone rang, my blood turned cold. Every email notification was a potential death sentence. I went to the office. I smiled at Martin. I filed my reports. I called my mother on my lunch break and told her I loved her, my voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. Inside, I was a raw nerve, exposed to the air. The bomb detonated on a Tuesday. At 10:17 a.m., the main doors of the accounting annex swung open. A group of 6 men in severe, dark suits walked in. They were not from Titan Corp. They moved with a grim, legal purpose. With them was the head of corporate security, a former Marine whose face was always a stone. They did not look left or right. They did not speak. The only sound was the sharp click of their dress shoes on the tile floor. They moved straight to the executive elevators, used a special key, and disappeared upwards. The office, which had been humming with the usual noise, fell into a dead, shocked silence. Then the whispers started, flying through instant messages faster than light. Who were they? They went to 42. They're in the Blackwood wing. The doors are locked. Security is standing outside. The tension was a physical thing, a thick fog choking the room. No one worked. Everyone watched the elevator banks. At 1:30 p.m., the elevator doors on our floor opened. But no one got out. It was a corridor. Walking through our lobby, surrounded by 4 security guards, was Richard Callaway. The transformation was shocking. The king was fallen. His silver hair, always perfect, was disheveled. His famous tan had a sickly, gray-yellow cast. He was wearing his suit jacket, but his tie was loose, his collar rumpled. In his arms, he carried a cardboard box. I could see inside it, a crystal award that said Innovator of the Year, a stress ball, a fancy pen set, a framed photo of him on his yacht. He stared straight ahead, his eyes focused on nothing, seeing nothing. He looked old. He looked hollow. Behind him, in a grim parade, came his lieutenants. Everett Sloan, his face pale and slick with sweat, 2 other VPs. Their chief of staff. They all carried boxes. They all wore the same stunned, shattered expression, the look of men who had believed they were gods and had just been told they were made of clay. They walked the long walk through the silent office, past rows of desks where people sat frozen, watching. No one spoke. The only sound was the shuffle of feet and the rustle of cardboard. They passed my cubicle. Callaway's gaze swept over me, over my fern, over my photo of my mother. There was no recognition. To him, I was still air. I was still nothing. They went out the grand glass lobby doors and were gone. The silence held for a full minute after the doors swished shut. Then, the office exploded into sound. gasps, questions, the frantic tapping of keyboards as people rushed to tell the world. The official email from the CEO came at 4 p.m. It was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. After mutual discussion, Richard Callaway has stepped down from leadership of the Blackwood Fund to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his years of visionary service. An interim leadership team is in place as we conduct a thorough review to ensure the fund operates with the utmost integrity. The stock price began to fall the second the after-hours trading market opened. At 8 p.m., Leo Chen published his masterpiece. The headline was simple: The House of Cards, How Titan Corp's Blackwood Fund Built an Empire on Lies. It was all there. The fake receipts, the shell companies, the stolen millions, the broken dreams of the startups, the yacht, the gold-plated sink. He connected every dot, using the evidence from the basement server as his roadmap. He named names. He quoted the panicked draft email from Everett. It was a thunderclap that echoed across the entire financial world. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation the next morning. The Department of Justice opened a criminal probe. Titan Corp's stock collapsed, losing 40% of its value in a week. Shareholders filed a dozen class action lawsuits. The board of directors was purged. Callaway's life unraveled in the spotlight. His assets were frozen. He was forced to sell the calculated risk, his mansion, his art collection to pay for his army of lawyers. He was indicted on 17 counts of fraud, money laundering, and securities violations. The last picture I saw of him was outside a courthouse, a shrunken man in a cheap raincoat, hiding his face from the cameras, his empire of lies reduced to a court docket number. Everett Sloan flipped. He made a deal with prosecutors, providing evidence against Callaway in exchange for a lighter sentence. The castle had not just fallen, it had eaten its own. And me. I was interviewed twice by the serious men from the internal investigation, and once by very polite agents from the SEC. I was Jennifer, the quiet, meticulous, junior accountant from the 17th floor. I showed them my tidy, boring files. I showed them my perfect attendance records. I expressed a gentle, bewildered shock at the news. I just processed the receipts they gave me, I said, my eyes wide. I had no idea. I was a model of oblivious, reliable efficiency. They thanked me for my time and moved on. I stayed at Titan Corp for 6 more months. The soul of the place had been cut out. The arrogant energy was gone, replaced by a pale, nervous, rule-following anxiety. New managers, with bland faces and clean records, were brought in. They issued new policies, new checks, new balances. It was a corpse, reanimated but not alive. They gave me a promotion to senior analyst and a substantial retention bonus. A reward for being a steady, loyal employee during a period of unprecedented challenge. I deposited the check without a smile. It was blood money, tainted with the suffering Callaway had caused. But I knew exactly what to do with it. The day my mother's cardiologist called, his voice warm with genuine pleasure, to say her latest tests were the best they'd ever been, that her heart was stable and strong, I knew my war was over. I had won. I typed up my letter of resignation the next morning. I used the bonus money to pay off every last cent of my mother's medical debt. The relief that washed over us was a physical thing, like stepping into the sun after a lifetime in cold shadows. Then I rented a small, sunny office with a window that looked out on a park. I bought 2 desks, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a new, fluffy bed for Binks. I opened Clear Ledger Bookkeeping. My card said, Jennifer Porter, honest numbers for honest work. My clients are not giants. They are a baker who wants to know if she can afford a second oven. A carpenter trying to save for his kids' college. A young artist selling her paintings online. A woman, not unlike my mother, who needs help managing the bills after an illness. Their numbers are simple. Their stories are true. I help them find the clarity in the chaos. I help them build something real. Sometimes, on my way to buy coffee, I'll walk past the Titan Corp Tower. It still stands, glass and steel reflecting the sun. It is still a castle. But the poisonous king is gone, his throne room empty, his treasures scattered. His empire of lies was dismantled, not by an army, but by a whisper, by a series of quiet, careful decimal points. People will ask how these things happen. They look for dramatic stories, the whistleblower on the news, the secret recording, the angry confession. That is not how it works. The powerful build their castles on the assumption of our silence. They believe the small people, the quiet people, the people just trying to get through the day, will be too afraid, too tired, too busy surviving to ever look up and question the grand, beautiful lie. They are right, most of the time. My name is Jennifer. I was small. I was quiet. I was so afraid I couldn't breathe sometimes. But I loved my mother more than I feared them. And I understood numbers. I knew that a single, crooked digit is a crack in the universe. I knew that a lie, no matter how small, has weight. And I had the patience to keep adding weight, ounce by ounce, until the floor gave way. I fought my war not with a sword, but with a spreadsheet. Not with a shout, but with a perfectly placed footnote. Not with an army, but with a silence that grew into a roar. I broke an empire without saying a word.